Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I am Dr. Qamar Mehboob, Associate Professor from the Physiology Department of Faisalabad Medical University. We were discussing the structure of the cell and I have given you some of the introduction to the cell. In today's lecture, I would like to explain the structure of the cell membrane. But before that, I should discuss some other thing also about the explanation of the lectures. Some of the students message me that anything related to the lecture is not clear to you, some point about the lecture. If you have any type of the question, kindly you can make the WhatsApp call to me after the Maghrib prayer in the evening. That's a much time free for me, and it is very easy to pick your calls and give you the answer. So kindly, and the same number is as I have given here. I have mentioned my mobile number here, this one, and it is the same for WhatsApp. So you can make the WhatsApp call very easily to me and ask any type of the question in the evening after the Maghrib Salah. Okay, now today we are going to discuss the structure and function of the cell membrane. The structure of the cell membrane, regarding that, it is mainly composed of the lipids and the cholesterol part. The lipids that are making it, that is the 42% of the membrane, and they are making barrier to the water and the water soluble substances. The cell membrane is mainly composed of proteins and the lipids, and the approximate composition for the protein is 55%, and it is the phospholipids which is making the 25%, cholesterol is 13%, and other lipids 4%, and while the carbohydrate they constitute the 3%. The basic lipid bilayer is composed of phospholipid molecule. From this you can see that this is the circular part which is called the head, and this is the longitudinal part which is called the tail. I write here the hydrophilic part and the hydrophobic part. Hydrophilic means, hydro means water and philic that is loving. Again, the hydro means water and phobic means to have fear. So, the structure of the cell membrane that is designed by the God in such a way that both heads they are facing the hydrophilic, they are facing the water substance, while the tails they are kept inside and facing each other. As the extracellular compartment is composed of extracellular fluid which is mainly water, here the intracellular compartment, again we have the intracellular fluid which is mainly composed of water. So we should have the hydrophilic ends towards intracellular, extracellular or the intracellular fluid compartments. So this is the organization of the cell membrane having two layers, phosphate and lipid layer. This is facing outside towards the water, while lipid layer kept inside facing each other, and again the head is towards the intracellular compartment. Different types of the substances including ions, glucose, water, urea and or any type of other gas, for example carbon dioxide, nitrogen, oxygen, halomethane or any other chemical going inside the cell or outside the cell must be penetrated through this membrane. This is the picture to show a look over the cell membrane. You can see different types of the channels also, different types of the proteins, which some of the proteins they are just present over the cell membrane and some they are crossing the cell membrane, and these are some other substances which are actually the carbohydrates. They are also present over the surface of the cell membrane. We will discuss all these one by one, and also the substances how they are going inside or outside the cell membrane, which is mainly called the cell transport. While discussing the functions of the cell membrane, we will go in the details of the cell transport also. But here from this picture you can see the surface of the cell membrane. Many times you are asked in the Viva or in the SEQ that what are the functions of the cell membrane. These are different types of the functions which I have mentioned here point wise, but they are not present in such way in the chitin, so you must follow these slides. These specific functions written point-wise I have taken from the Sherwood. This is another important and very nice book of physiology. Sometimes we have to pick some topics from other books also. So one of this topic, that is the functions of the cell membrane, I have taken it from the Sherwood. I am mentioning the reference here also because if you want to discuss or uh, if you want to see the details of this topic, you can follow this book also. So regarding the functions of the cell membrane, the cell membrane, the other name is the plasma membrane. The plasma membrane bonds the cell, so it is the outermost boundary of the cell, and because of that all the organelles of the cell they are kept inside in a bonded form. It is a thin membranous structure that encloses each cell and is composed mostly of lipid molecules and studded with the proteins. It keeps the intracellular fluid within the cell from mingling with the extracellular fluid outside the cells. So it is a barrier between the intra and the extracellular fluids. It is not simply a mechanical barrier to hold in the cell contents. Its proteins selectively control movement of molecules between intra and extracellular fluid. Through this structure, the cell controls entry of the nutrient and other needed supplies and export of products manufactured within, while at the same time guarding against unwanted traffic into or out of the cell. So anything which wants to go inside the cell or comes outside the cell, it has to travel through the cell membrane. It controls the entry of nutrient molecule and the exit of secretory and waste products. It maintains differences in ion concentrations inside and outside the cell. which are important in the membrane's electrical activity. It also participates in the joining of cells to form tissues and organs. Finally, it plays a key role in enabling a cell to respond to signals from chemical messengers in the cell's environment. This ability is important in communication among cells. No matter what the cell type, these common membrane functions are crucial to the cell's survival, to its ability to perform specialized homeostatic activities, and to its ability to coordinate its functions with those of other cells. Many of the functional differences among cell types are a result of subtle variations in the composition of their plasma membrane, which in turn enable different cells to interact in different ways with essentially the same extracellular fluid compartment. I am mentioning here the cell transport, different ways of the cell transport through the cell membrane. As I have discussed, that is the most important function of the cell membrane is the cell transport. This transport may require energy, or it may be without the gain of the or without the utilization of the energy. If it requires energy, the process will be active transport. If the energy is not required, the transport will be passive. For the active transport, we need ATP. As you can see from here, that substance, it is coming from outside going to inside, and it requires energy in the form of ATP. Or substance coming from inside going outside, or from outside to inside in the form of endocytosis, the process through which the substances, they are going inside the cell. Then it can also be named as bulk transport. It also sometimes requires the energy. Then we comes to the osmosis, simple water movement or diffusion, that is the transport from high concentration to the low concentration or facilitated diffusion. I am not going in the details of all these processes because in the following lectures we will discuss all these types of the cell transport in much detail. So if it is not so much clear to you, you can ask the details from me in the evening, but you must stay with me to have the details in the following lectures. I will come to all these types of the cell transport again and again in the following lectures, and also give you the best examples. This is an animation to show a very specific structure which is called the receptor. This you can see the receptor, it is attached or it is present over the surface of the cell membrane. Many times you are asked about this, that what are the structures present over the surface of the cell membrane. So receptors, different types of the receptors, that is an example, or the structure which is present over the surface of the cell membrane. Different types of the hormones, they come to be attached to the surface of the receptor. Once the hormone attached to the surface, you can see from this animation that after the attachment of the hormone, some changes occur over the other side of the receptor, which is present inside the intracellular compartment, and through this change different types of the functions occurring or running in the cell machinery that take place. Don't worry about the details. I just want to mention the structure present over the cell membrane or how it functions, just giving the introduction because we will discuss all these things in much more detail in the following lectures. So now I am giving you just an introduction about the cell and then we will go the details one by one and system wise also. So each and everything that will be discussed in much more detail. This is another example to show the transport through the cell membrane. You can see clearly that some of the substances shown in these blue molecules, they are freely permeable through this membrane. Some ions, they are rejected or going as such. Some molecules cannot transport through it freely, so that they need some specific channel or specific way. Through this animation, we conclude that some of the substances they can freely transport through the cell membrane, while some ions of substances they need some specific ways. They may need energy or they are provided with some other concentration differences through which they can transport through the cell membrane. This is another example to show the substance that is freely permeable. Then this substance, this has a very peculiar size channel through which the substance which comes now this one, it has very specific structure present over the surface cell membrane to which it is attached. The channel open and the substance is transported to the inside of the cell. So through this animation we conclude that each substance which is transported through the cell membrane has its specific way, has its specific transport channel. It may be transported freely or it may require energy or it may require specific attachment to the receptor or it may require specific type of the channel. Whatsoever, we conclude collectively that substances they are coming inside or going outside the cell, they have to travel the cell membrane, which is composed of two types of the layers, making the phospholipids, lipid layer inside and phosphate part facing the water outside or in the intracellular compartment. So with this short introduction to the cell membrane, now I come to the protein part, which is making 55% of the membrane, and this is the thing which is going to provide the specificity to a membrane. What is meant by this word specificity? This means that each substance has its a definite separate type of the channel or the way. So we cannot label all the things collectively. Each and everything, each and every ion or the substance has its own specific way to be transported through the cell membrane. Mainly the proteins, they are of two types. They may be integral proteins that protrude all the way through the membrane and peripheral proteins that are attached only to one structure of the membrane and do not penetrate all the way through. In this picture, I am showing both types, that some are they are just present over the surface and some they are penetrated whole of the layer and making the channel. Many of the integral protein provide structured channels or pores through which water molecules and water-soluble substances, especially ions, can diffuse between the extracellular and intracellular fluids. These protein channels also have selective properties that allow the diffusion of some substances over others. So you must remember that at each and every part of this transport mechanism, we have the specificity, the number one property, through which the substances they are transported through the cell membrane. Other integral proteins act as carrier proteins for transporting substances that otherwise could not penetrate the lipid bilayer. Sometimes these even transport substances in the direction opposed to their electrochemical gradient for diffusion, which is called the active transport, which I have already explained. This animation is showing very clearly the protein part making the channel through which this substance that is coming inside, and it requires the energy so that ATP is going to be changed into ADP. This substance that is transported through the cell membrane through the active transport mechanism. Now comes the next part, that is the carbohydrates. Carbohydrates occur almost invariable in combination with the proteins or lipids in the form of glycoproteins or glycolipids. So if they combines with the protein part, they are named as glycoprotein, and if they combine with the lipid part, so they are making the glycolipids. In fact, most of the integral proteins are glycoproteins, and about 1/10 of the membrane lipid molecules are glycolipids. The glyco portion of these membranes almost invariably protrude to the outside of the cell, dangling outward from the cell surface. Many other carbohydrate compounds, which are named as proteoglycans, mainly that are the carbohydrate substances bound to the small protein cores. They are loosely attached to the outer surface of the cell as well. Thus, the entire outside surface of the cell often has a loose carbohydrate core called the glycocalyx. The carbohydrate molecules attached to the outer surface of the cell have several important functions. And the most important thing is that many of them have a negative electric charge, which gives most cells an overall negative surface charge that repels other negative charges. Secondly, the glycocalyx of some cells attach to the glycocalyx of the other cell, thus attaching cells to one another. And thirdly, many of the carbohydrates act as receptor substances for binding hormones such as insulin. When bound, this combination activates attached internal proteins that in turn activate a cascade of intercellular enzymes, as I have already discussed. Some carbohydrate molecules enter into the immune reactions also. This is an animation to show the surface of the cell membrane. You can see the substances going inside and outside, and very close view of the cell membrane itself, forming the bilayer, this one, and different channels attached to the cell membrane, this one. Lastly, the cholesterol part, it is present in the membranes in varying amounts, generally decreases membrane fluidity and permeability, except in the plasma membrane, increases membrane flexibility and the stability. With that, we complete our second lecture. Please stay with me and follow my other lectures. Okay, thanks and Allah Hafiz.